Finally, someone has come across the one piece of evidence that I've always said we need in order to prove the ancient astronaut theory. Scientists found something strange hiding in old human bones. It's a DNA marker that shouldn't exist. This mystery code appears in ancient people from all over the world, but it doesn't match any humans we know about. Geneticists are worried because they can't explain where it came from or what it means. What if our ancestors mixed with beings we never knew existed? Could their DNA still be inside us today? Join us as we uncover the genetic secret that's rewriting human history, the mysterious marker. It all started in a genetics laboratory where scientists were doing what they always do, looking at old DNA samples under microscopes and running tests on ancient bones. Nothing special, just another day at work. They were studying remains of humans who lived thousands of years ago, trying to learn more about our ancestors and how they lived. These weren't just bones from one place either. They had samples from all over the world: Europe, Asia, Africa, and even some from the Middle East. The scientists expected to find the usual stuff, DNA that looked like regular ancient human DNA. Maybe some traces of Neanderthal genes here and there. Perhaps a bit of Denisovan DNA mixed in. That's pretty normal. We've known for years that ancient humans sometimes had babies with Neanderthals and Denisovans. So finding those genetic signatures wasn't surprising anymore. But then something weird showed up on their computer screens. There was a marker in the DNA that didn't look right. At first, they thought maybe the equipment was broken or the sample got contaminated somehow. That happens, sometimes in labs. So they ran the tests again and again. The same strange marker kept appearing. This marker was like a genetic signature, a specific pattern in the DNA code that stood out like a sore thumb. It didn't match anything they had in their databases. It wasn't regular human DNA. It wasn't Neanderthal DNA. It definitely wasn't Denisovan DNA. It was something else entirely. Something they'd never seen before. What made it even stranger was that this marker showed up in multiple samples from different ancient humans. We're talking about people who lived in completely different parts of the world, separated by thousands of miles. Some of these ancient humans lived in caves in Europe around 40,000 years ago. Others lived in Asia maybe 50,000 years ago. Some were found in Africa from even earlier times. The timeline was confusing, too. This marker appeared in humans from different time periods, but it seemed most common in populations that lived between 30,000 and 70,000 years ago. That's a huge span of time, and it meant whatever left this genetic mark had been around for a very long time. Here's why scientists got so worried. According to everything we know about human evolution, this marker shouldn't exist. Our family tree is supposed to be pretty well mapped out by now. We know about Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and a few other extinct human species. We understand how they're related and how their DNA mixed together over time. But this new marker didn't fit anywhere on that tree. It was like finding a piece of a puzzle that came from a completely different puzzle box. It belonged to something, but not to anything we recognized. The genetic code was clearly from something human-like, or at least something closely related to humans. But it was different enough that it had to come from a population or species we didn't know about. The scientists kept testing more samples, hoping maybe it was just a fluke or an error. But the more they tested, the more they found this mysterious DNA marker was real. It was widespread, and it was hiding in the genes of our ancient ancestors, and nobody could explain where it came from or what it meant. That's when the real panic started to set in. The panic and the cover-up. When the scientists first realized what they had found, they didn't rush to tell everyone. Instead, they sat in their laboratories looking at each other with worried faces. This wasn't the kind of discovery you just casually mention at lunch. This was the kind of thing that could turn the entire field of genetics upside down. The lead researchers started making phone calls to other experts around the world. Quiet phone calls, private emails. They needed to make sure they weren't crazy. That they hadn't made some terrible mistake. Within weeks, small groups of geneticists were meeting behind closed doors at universities and research centers. These weren't the usual, cheerful scientific conferences where people share exciting news. These were tense, serious meetings where everyone spoke in hushed voices. Word started spreading through the genetics community like wildfire, but only among the inner circle. Young graduate students noticed their professors were acting strange, spending hours in private discussions, and looking stressed. Senior researchers were suddenly flying to emergency meetings without explaining why. Something big was happening, but most people didn't know what it was yet. The problem was that nobody knew what to do with this information. If they published their findings right away, it would make headlines everywhere. The media would go crazy. People would start asking questions that the scientists couldn't answer. And worse, the discovery could be misunderstood or twisted to support all kinds of wild theories about human origins. Some researchers argued they should keep working quietly until they understood more. They wanted to figure out where this mystery DNA came from before going public. After all, announcing that ancient humans had DNA from an unknown source without being able to explain it would just cause confusion and panic. Better to solve the mystery first than share the complete story. But other scientists disagreed strongly. They believed this information was too important to keep secret. Hiding a major discovery about human evolution felt wrong, like lying to the public. Science is supposed to be open and transparent. Plus, keeping secrets rarely works for long. Someone would leak the information eventually. Anyway, there were also personal concerns at play in the world of academic research. Being first to publish a major discovery is everything. It means grants, job, security, fame, and a place in history. Several different research teams had found evidence of this marker independently. Everyone wanted credit, but nobody wanted to look foolish if the discovery turned out to be wrong. Somehow, the tension grew worse as months passed. Researchers who were normally friendly colleagues started competing against each other. Some teams rushed to gather more data, working late, nights and weekends. Others held back, triple-checking everything before committing to any conclusions. Trust began breaking down. Scientists worried that rivals might steal their data or publish first. Meanwhile, academic journals were getting suspicious. Multiple teams had submitted papers about unusual DNA findings in ancient humans, but the papers were vague and incomplete. Journal editors kept asking for more information, but the researchers kept stalling. They'd say they needed more time to verify their results or that they were waiting for additional samples. Then the inevitable happened. Someone leaked information to a science blogger. Just a hint, really. Nothing concrete, but it was enough. The blogger posted about rumors of a shocking DNA discovery that geneticists were allegedly keeping secret. Other bloggers picked up the story. Forums started buzzing with speculation. The cover-up, such as it was beginning to fall apart. The truth was going to come out whether the scientists were ready or not. Tracing the origins. Once the secrets started slipping out, scientists had no choice but to dig deeper into what they'd found. They needed answers fast, and what they discovered made everything even more disturbing. The mystery DNA marker wasn't just sitting quietly in a few scattered samples. It was everywhere, woven into the genetic fabric of ancient human populations across multiple continents, like some kind of invisible thread connecting them all. Teams of researchers began mapping exactly where this marker appeared. They pulled out every ancient human sample they could find in laboratories, museums, and research facilities worldwide. The geographic distribution was unsettling. The marker showed up in remains found in remote caves in Siberia, in burial sites across Europe, in ancient settlements throughout the Middle East, and in human fossils from parts of Asia. These weren't populations that should have been connected. These were groups separated by vast distances, harsh terrain, and thousands of years. The most chilling part was realizing that whatever left this genetic signature had interbred with humans multiple times in multiple places. This wasn't a one-time mixing event. This was sustained contact between ancient humans and something else. Something that left its mark in our DNA, but left almost no other trace of its existence. No bones, no artifacts, no cave paintings, just this ghostly genetic shadow. Scientists started calling it a ghost population, which sounds almost poetic until you think about what it really means. Somewhere in our past, there was an entire group or species of human-like beings that lived alongside our ancestors, had children with them, and then vanished completely. Not a single skeleton has ever been found that we can definitively say belong to this mystery population. They're gone, erased from the fossil record, existing now only as fragments of code buried in ancient DNA. Computer models were built to try to understand how this ghost population moved and mixed with humans. The models kept showing the same disturbing pattern. This wasn't random mixing. The genetic evidence suggested organized, repeated contact over thousands of years. Whatever these beings were, they weren't just occasionally stumbling into human camps. They were living near humans, interacting with them regularly, becoming part of human communities in ways we can barely comprehend now. Every attempt to identify the source led to dead ends and darker questions. If this DNA came from an unknown human species, where did they live? Why haven't we found their bones? Some species leave behind thousands of fossils, but this ghost population left nothing but genetic breadcrumbs. It was as if they deliberately avoided leaving any physical trace, which is impossible, or as if something happened that destroyed all evidence of their existence. The timeline made things worse. The marker appeared strongest in humans who lived during a specific window of time, roughly between 70,000 and 30,000 years ago. Then it started fading. By 20,000 years ago, it was becoming rare. By 10,000 years ago, it was almost gone. Something happened to this ghost population. They either died out, stopped mixing with humans, or disappeared in some other way we don't understand. Researchers examined every theory. Maybe they were wiped out by climate change. Maybe disease killed them off. Maybe humans eventually drove them to extinction through competition or violence. But none of these explanations felt quite right. The genetic evidence didn't match the patterns you'd expect from any of those scenarios. The truth was more unsettling. Nobody had any real idea what happened to them or where they went, what this means for human history. The implications of this discovery were like pulling on a loose thread and watching an entire tapestry unravel. Everything we thought we understood about human history suddenly looked incomplete, maybe even wrong. The neat, organized story of human evolution that scientists had carefully constructed over decades was falling apart, and what emerged in its place was darker and far more mysterious. For years, we've told ourselves a comfortable story about our origins. Humans evolved in Africa, spread across the world, occasionally mixed with Neanderthals and Denisovans, and eventually became the only humans left standing. Simple, clean, easy to understand. But this ghost population shattered that narrative completely. It meant our ancestors were sharing the planet with more groups than we ever imagined, and we have no idea who most of them were. The human family tree, which scientists had drawn and redrawn countless times, suddenly had a massive blank space in it. There was a whole branch missing, a lineage that should be there, but isn't. This ghost population had to come from somewhere. They had to be related to us somehow. But where did they fit? Did they split off from early humans millions of years ago? Did they evolve separately in some isolated corner of the world? Or were they something else entirely, something we don't have words for yet? The evidence suggested these beings were remarkably widespread. They weren't confined to one region or ecosystem. They managed to interact with human populations across Africa, Europe, and Asia over tens of thousands of years. That level of distribution and survival requires intelligence, adaptability, and social organization. These weren't primitive creatures stumbling through the wilderness. They were sophisticated enough to thrive alongside humans during one of the most challenging periods in prehistoric history. What disturbed researchers most was thinking about what this mixing really meant. When ancient humans and this ghost population had children together, those children survived and passed on their genes. That means the two groups were compatible enough to produce healthy offspring. They were close relatives, genetically speaking. Close enough to breed with, close enough to live with, maybe close enough to communicate with, and yet we know absolutely nothing about them. The timeline gaps that once puzzled scientists suddenly made terrible sense. There were always periods in human history where populations seemed to change rapidly, where new technologies appeared seemingly out of nowhere, where human behavior shifted in ways that seemed inexplicable. Maybe those changes weren't humans evolving on their own. Maybe they were the result of contact and mixing with this ghost population. Maybe we learned things from them, or they learned from us. And that exchange shaped both groups forever. But there were new gaps, too. Darker ones that nobody wanted to think about too carefully. If this ghost population was so widespread and successful, why did they disappear? What happened between 30,000 and 10,000 years ago that erased them from existence? Did humans kill them off? Did they die from some catastrophe we don't know about? Or did something else happen? Something stranger and more unsettling that we haven't even considered yet. The most chilling realization was this. We share our DNA with beings we cannot name, cannot picture, and cannot understand. They're our ancestors, too, just as much as the humans we can trace. Their blood runs in our veins. Their genes helped make us what we are, and we don't know who they were. Ruling out the alternatives, after the initial shock wore off, scientists did what they always do when faced with something impossible. They tried desperately to explain it away. Nobody wanted this mystery to be real. Nobody wanted to rewrite everything we know about human evolution. So, they searched for any alternative explanation that could make the problem disappear. What they found was even more unsettling than the mystery itself. The first hope was contamination. Maybe the DNA samples had gotten mixed up with something else in the laboratory. It happens more often than people think. Stray hair, fingerprints, even bacteria can corrupt ancient DNA samples. So, research teams went back and tested everything again using the strictest protocols imaginable. They worked in sterile environments, used fresh equipment, and verified every single step multiple times. The marker was still there. It wasn't a contamination, it was real. Then scientists wondered if maybe this was just a natural mutation, something that appeared randomly in ancient humans and spread through normal reproduction. After all, DNA mutates constantly. Maybe this marker was just an unusual but perfectly normal human variation that looked strange because we hadn't seen it before. But when they ran the genetic analysis, that theory collapsed, too. The marker was too complex, too different, too structured to be a simple mutation. It had the signature of something that came from outside the main human lineage entirely. Some researchers proposed the remnant DNA hypothesis, which sounded reasonable at first. Maybe this marker was a leftover genetic material from a very ancient human ancestor. Something that had been hiding dormant in our DNA for hundreds of thousands of years and only showed up occasionally in certain populations, like genetic echoes from the distant past. But this theory had a fatal problem. The marker appeared too frequently and too recently to be an ancient remnant. It showed up strongest in humans from 50,000 years ago, which meant whatever left it was alive and breeding with humans at that time. This wasn't an echo. This was fresh contact. Every conventional explanation failed the same way. The evidence was too strong, too consistent, too widespread. Scientists tested for errors in their dating methods, thinking maybe the samples were younger or older than they thought. The dates were correct. They looked for geological explanations, wondering if something in the burial environment could have altered the DNA. Nothing environmental could create this pattern. They even considered whether the DNA extraction process itself was creating false markers. It wasn't. The darkest possibility, the one nobody wanted to voice out loud, kept pushing its way to the surface. What if this marker was exactly what it appeared to be? What if there really was an unknown population living alongside humans, breeding with them, and then vanishing without leaving any fossils behind? Not because we haven't looked hard enough, but because there genuinely aren't any fossils to find. That raised questions that made even hardened scientists uncomfortable. How could an entire population of human-like beings disappear so completely? Extinction is messy. It leaves traces, bones scattered in caves, remnants in bogs, something. But this ghost population left nothing except their DNA. It was as if they existed in some parallel world that only occasionally touched ours, leaving genetic fingerprints, but no physical evidence. The worst part was acknowledging that science couldn't explain it. These researchers had spent their entire careers studying human evolution, building their reputations on understanding our past. And now they were facing something that broke every rule, defied every explanation, and refused to fit into any framework they understood. The mystery wasn't going away. No convenient answer was going to save them. They were stuck with the truth that made no sense, and the more they learned, the less they understood. Modern implications and the search for carriers. Once scientists accepted that this ghost DNA was real, a new fear took hold. If ancient humans carried this marker, did anyone alive today still have it? The question haunted research laboratories around the world. Because if modern people carried remnants of this mystery DNA, everything changed. It wasn't just ancient history anymore. It was present. It was now. It was us. The search began quietly at first. Researchers started screening modern genetic databases, looking for any trace of the marker in living populations. They examined DNA samples from thousands of people across every continent, searching for that distinctive genetic signature. What they found sent chills through the scientific community. The marker wasn't gone. It was still here, just hiding. Small fragments of the ghost DNA showed up in scattered populations around the world. Not everyone had it, not even most people, but enough did that it couldn't be ignored. People living in remote regions of Asia showed traces. Some European populations carried tiny pieces. Even a few isolated groups in Africa and the Middle East had fragments of this ancient genetic legacy buried in their chromosomes. The ghost population had left descendants, and they were walking among us, mostly unaware of what was in their blood. The medical implications were terrifying to consider. Every piece of DNA in your body does something, affects something, influences how your body works. This mystery DNA was no different. It had been mixing with human genes for thousands of years, becoming part of how some people's bodies functioned. But nobody knew what it did. Nobody knew if it was helpful, harmful, or somewhere in between. Research teams started looking for health patterns in people who carried fragments of the marker. Did they have higher rates of certain diseases, better immune systems, unusual physical or mental traits? The early findings were disturbing because they were contradictory. Some carriers seemed to have enhanced resistance to certain infections, which made sense if the ghost population had adapted to different diseases than regular humans. But others showed increased susceptibility to autoimmune disorders, as if their immune systems were confused by having two different genetic blueprints trying to operate at once. There were hints of other effects, too. Things researchers barely wanted to mention in their papers. Some studies suggested carriers might have subtle differences in brain structure, variations in how certain neurotransmitters functioned, changes in pain perception or sensory processing. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just small differences that made people wonder what the ghost population was really like, how their minds worked, how they experienced the world. The ethical questions multiplied like cancer. Should people be told if they carry this marker? What would that information do to them? Some researchers argued that carriers had a right to know about their genetic heritage, no matter how mysterious. Others insisted that telling people they had DNA from an unknown species would cause unnecessary panic and confusion. After all, what could anyone actually do with that information? Then there was the darker worry that nobody wanted to speak about directly. If certain populations carried more of this ghost DNA than others, would that lead to discrimination? Would people start dividing themselves into carriers and non-carriers? History showed what humans did when they thought some groups were genetically different from others. The results were never good. Scientists had nightmares about their discovery being twisted into something ugly, used to justify prejudice or worse. The research continued anyway because it had to. More samples were collected. More people were tested. International collaborations formed to pull data and resources. The search for living carriers became one of the largest genetic projects in history, driven by a mix of scientific curiosity and deep unspoken dread. Because every answer they found raised 10 more questions, and every piece of data suggested that this mystery was far from solved. The ghost population might be gone, but their legacy was still shaping humanity in ways we were only beginning to understand. The truth that's still unfolding. Years have passed since the first discovery of the ghost DNA marker, and if anything, the mystery has only deepened. What scientists hoped would become clearer with more research has instead fractured into competing theories, contradictory evidence, and uncomfortable truths that challenge everything we thought we knew about being human. The panic has faded somewhat, replaced by a darker, more persistent unease that refuses to go away. Today, multiple research teams around the world are pursuing different angles on the same puzzle, and their findings don't always agree. Some laboratories insist the ghost population was a distinct human species that evolved separately from Homo sapiens, perhaps in an isolated region we haven't identified yet. They point to subtle genetic markers that suggest deep evolutionary divergence, maybe going back 500,000 years or more. These researchers believe the ghost population developed independently, adapted to different environments, and only later came into contact with our ancestors. But other scientists argue the evidence points to something stranger. They found patterns in the DNA that don't match any known evolutionary pathway. The ghost marker contains genetic sequences that appear too organized, too specific, almost as if they were designed rather than naturally evolved. These researchers won't say what they think that means, not publicly anyway, but their papers hint at possibilities that make their colleagues uncomfortable. Suggestions that something about this population's genetics was fundamentally different from anything else we've ever encountered. The international collaboration that formed to study this phenomenon has become one of the largest scientific efforts in history. Laboratories share data. Archaeological sites are being re-examined with new techniques. and ancient DNA samples are being extracted from bones that were previously thought too damaged to yield genetic information. Every month brings new findings, but none of them provide the simple answer everyone hoped for. What we know for certain now is limited, but significant. The ghost population definitely existed. They were human-like enough to produce fertile offspring with Homo sapiens, which means they couldn't have been too genetically distant from us. They were widespread across multiple continents during a specific time period, roughly between 70,000 and 30,000 years ago, and then they disappeared, leaving behind only fragments of DNA in human populations. We also know that modern humans carry remnants of this ghost DNA in varying amounts. The distribution isn't random. Certain populations have more of it than others, though the reasons for this remain unclear. Research into what these genetic fragments actually do continues, but progress is slow and often contradictory. Some studies suggest beneficial effects, others hint at potential health risks, and many show no clear impact at all. What remains speculation? Though heavily debated, speculation is almost everything else. Where did the ghost population originate? What did they look like? How did they live? What happened to them? Different research teams have different answers, and nobody can prove their theory is correct. Some believe climate change drove them to extinction. Others think human expansion gradually absorbed them through interbreeding until they ceased to exist as a distinct group. A few researchers propose darker scenarios involving conflict and violence, though the genetic evidence doesn't strongly support this. The most disturbing aspect is what hasn't been found. Despite decades of archaeological work, not a single fossil has been definitively identified as belonging to the ghost population. Questions that still need answering multiply faster than scientists can address them. Did the ghost population have language, culture, art? Were they more advanced than Homo sapiens in some ways or less? Did they have their own beliefs, their own understanding of the world? Were the children born from human and ghost population mixing accepted in both communities, or were they outcasts? Did these two groups live peacefully together, or was there conflict we can't see anymore? The research continues because it has to. New technologies are being developed specifically to extract and analyze ancient DNA more effectively. Archaeological expeditions are being planned to search regions that might have been home to the ghost population. Geneticists are building ever more sophisticated computer models to understand how this mystery DNA functions in modern humans. But the deeper scientists dig, the more they realize how little they actually know. The ghost population remains what they've always been. Ghosts present in our DNA, absent from our understanding. They shaped us in ways we're only beginning to comprehend, left their mark on our species permanently, and then vanished into history like smoke dissolving in wind. The ancient secret is still hidden in our DNA, and it's starting to look like it might stay hidden forever. We live with the legacy of beings we cannot name, carrying their genes forward into an uncertain future, never quite understanding what they were or what they mean for what we are. The truth isn't unfolding. It's fragmenting into 1,000 possibilities, and every answer we find makes us less certain than we were before. That might be the most unsettling discovery of all. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your